Hi guys, welcome to the Clubhouse. Today we've got British racing driver Dino Zamparelli on to talk. He's going to be discussing his career and all things Formula One. Dino, good afternoon. Welcome along. How are you doing? How are you coping with life in lockdown?
All good. Thank you, Toby. Thank you for having me. All good. Yeah, it's a bit quiet, isn't it? But we're getting on with it and hopefully waiting for all the stuff to sort of resume, all the sporting stuff anyway, to resume fairly shortly.
Now, you and I are always quite competitive when it comes to running and stuff, usually out running together or separately and comparing times. You managed to keep in shape during this period?
Ish. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? It really is tricky. But no, I went for a run this morning, so you'll be glad to know. And getting fitter and fitter. It's very hard when there's no end in sight, to keep that kind of fitness up. But I think just generally trying to be healthy and fit and healthy is important. So yeah, no, it's not easy, but enjoying it.
And how are you keeping occupied? Because you've sort of taken a step back from the racing side of things, so there's not necessarily that to work towards from a fitness perspective. How are you keeping occupied during this time? Have you had many projects that you've kind of been getting stuck into?
Yeah, I've been planning really. Most of my stuff at the moment, typically I'd spend a lot of my time on the phone to sort of clients and drivers that I look after and teams I work with. But obviously with nothing going on, it's just quite quiet. So at the moment, it's just about planning for when we come out of lockdown and able to get back onto race circuits, back into track days and race days. So that's kind of what I've been sort of filling my time with, really, is just waiting for when we come out and making sure we're ready for when we do come out.
And you've been able to use, since you've kind of, like I say, taken a step back from the racing side of things, you're using your contacts wisely now, and you're heavily involved in the sort of hospitality side of things, but also working with the likes of Archie Hamilton, that many people will know as well, from a sort of website branding, building up his brand as well. So what sort of stuff have you been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've raced myself since the age of 13, 14, 27 now. So it's about 13 years of racing. And so yeah, got kind of to the end last year and decided that I wanted to kind of shift the focus onto the business side and utilizing all the contacts and the experience that I've got within the racing world. And I started my career in sort of single seaters towards the sort of F1 as the goal. And then I moved to sports car racing with Porsche as a brand in 2015, did that for 4 or 5 years in the Porsche Carrera Cup and endurance racing after that. I had a great time. I haven't hung my boots up at all, but I've sort of, as I say, shifted away to sort of the business element, if you like, and working with everything that I've got and I've learned over the years. And yeah, that's what I've been doing. So that's what I've kind of been focused on in the lockdown, is really, as I say, kind of the timing's a bit weird because the last race for me was the end of last year and I didn't have anything planned for this year. But yeah, so focusing on the business stuff and when we come out of it, what that looks like.
And you, I read, I think correctly, that you started karting at the age of 7. Has it always been motor racing that you've wanted to be involved in, and ultimately was Formula One, for example, the ultimate carrot at the end of that?
Yeah, so when I started karting, I got in a kart at 7, but racing, I think it was like 10 to 12, something like that. Racing karts at that age is quite, you look back 10 years old or 12 years old, that's quite a big thing, really, isn't it? I mean, it's a go-kart. I don't know how fast it went, probably 40, 30 miles an hour. I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, so I started that when I was young and then moved into car racing at 14, 15, and then single seater racing at 16, all the way through to 22 years old, I think I was. And the goal firmly was Formula One and trying to make it all the way up to up the ladder. I raced in Formula 3 and test drove Formula 2, so one step below F1. And I was on the Formula 1 package weekend, which was pretty cool experience. But yeah, I mean, it was a cool time of my life. But Formula 1, I mean, if you think about the odds to get there, I mean, there's 20 seats and, I mean, gosh, thousands of drivers. So it's very, very minimal, the chance to get in there. And we decided to move over to sports cars as sort of more of a career move for me back then. But yeah, Formula One was the goal, and I'm sure it's probably 99% of most drivers' goal when they're starting out in their careers. Certainly, if you went to all the karting circuits at the moment, if they were going, and you asked them, I'm sure most of them would say Formula One is their goal.
And did you have to make a lot of sacrifices along the way, maybe socially, when it comes to hanging out with friends and family in your spare time? I know from knowing you growing up that you've, a lot of weekends and a lot of time was spent at practice at racing circuits up and down the UK and in Europe as well. Was a lot sacrificed from a social perspective?
Yeah, it was. I probably don't really remember an awful, I remember, but not kind of giving up stuff because it was just part and parcel of growing up. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff that I missed out on. Tuesday afternoons, I would think it was at school, we used to, everyone used to go and play football or rugby or whatever. And I used to go to Wales actually across the pond to test drive in the cars or karts that I was doing at the time. So it was slightly different, I suppose, but it didn't feel too much. I mean, I was really focused at the time on my racing career, and I missed a lot of school, but made up for it. And I sort of saw myself as every time I missed school, I was like, right, I'm going to focus on the race or my weekend or my testing program, but I have to make sure that I'm also doing well at school because it's hugely important. I felt it hugely important at that time. But yeah, I mean, to racing in general, because it's so time heavy, you're looking at a weekend of racing starts on Thursday, maybe even Wednesday, and goes right through to Sunday, and so you're missing a big chunk of the week is taken out. And in test days, you might take a day to get there. So you're looking at 2 or 3 days probably for a test day or testing days. So yeah, I mean, racing in general is not like a one-day thing. You have to go and spend a lot of time doing it and nurturing yourself and bettering yourself. So yeah, I don't think I missed out too much, but I mean, I think ultimately back then the goal was Formula One, so it was very intense trying to get there.
And you mentioned Formula 2 a moment ago. You obviously grew up, you won the Ginetta Junior Championship, Formula Renault as well, and you've raced in Formula 2. It took a bit of a hiatus, I think, just after 2012. But George Russell, for example, won it in 2018. He's now got his seat for the second season with Williams on the F1 grid. How difficult is it? I mean, I was looking through the names of drivers over previous seasons in Formula 2, and you don't recognise half of them. How difficult is it then to ultimately make that next step on to Formula One?
Well, I mean, this is it. I was saying to someone the other day that you look at all the Formula 2 drivers, I think there's about 20 seats, 22 seats, so 10 to 12 teams, 2 drivers per team, and it's sort of like a mini F1 proving ground. Albeit, you don't really see many drivers get promoted because it's not like a sort of football system where the top 3 get promoted and the bottom 3 of Formula 1 get demoted. It's not that same thing. So, you could do really well in Formula 2 and just never see F1. You could win the series. And that was kind of the thing back then when they made F2. They were like, let's get the winner of F2 into F1 because there's got to be a ladder for young drivers. But the problem is to get in F1, certainly with the teams that are sort of mid to lower tier, they need money. They need money to survive because they're not the sort of Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, McLarens of this world where they're sort of works teams. So those sort of teams don't need the money. The second-rate teams, if you like, need the cash. So if you're a Formula 2 driver, you've got to come with money. You can't just say, I've won, now I need to make it to F1. Rarely does that kind of work now. George Russell was very fortunate. He was partnered with Williams, or Mercedes, which is partnered with Williams, sorry. But typically now, if you're a Formula 2 driver, you've either got to partner up with a Formula 1 team and hope the seat becomes available when you've won. It's all about timing as well. I mean, we've seen coming up that Sainz moved to Ferrari. I mean, the timing for him has just been amazing, his career moves. But yeah, it's very difficult for young drivers anyway to go from Formula 3 to Formula 2 to Formula 1. It's such a narrow window to get there, and timing plays a huge part. When you're ready doesn't necessarily mean Formula 1's ready for you, So you've got to be lucky, but you've got to be skilled, and you've got to have the talent to go with it.
And this year, Lance Stroll, for example, is an example of somebody that's kind of come under a lot of criticism because his father is obviously very wealthy and has invested a lot of money into his Formula One career. He's tipped actually to do relatively well this season, had it not been for the current situation we find ourselves in. Nicholas Latifi's another one as well that has huge financial backing. Growing up, coming up through the ranks in motor racing, do you, even to get off to a good start, to kind of put you on the map, even at a karting level, do you need to have that sort of money early on in those phases?
Yeah, I mean, those two drivers that you mentioned, I mean, throughout my career, I heard so many, not so many, but lots of stories where, you'd say, oh, that's that so-and-so person is pretty wealthy and their son's going to make F1. You sort of go, well, why necessarily? And they say, well, because even if they don't make it there on merit or talent, even if they don't get to Ferrari, like the sort of typical route, then their dad will buy an F1 team and put them in. So that's kind of like, it's sort of not a joke, but it's sort of like, oh, okay, they're definitely going to make F1 because the money's there. And even if they, as I say, don't win everything and then Ferrari sign them, it's going to be there because they'll find a team that they can invest in, and the teams need money. And they're good drivers, the ones that you mentioned and others for sure. It's not a case of that they're just there on money, but money plays a huge part in motorsport drivers, racing drivers, because it's not just a case of saying, okay, there's 10, 15 million for the seat with Williams or whoever. You've got to be ready when you're there. So you've got to test, and to test and practice, you need money. And so to nurture yourself, or to nurture the person that you're coaching, whatever, they need to spend a lot of money. And so and then only then can you get good. So you might be on the grid. You might, typically for me, what I would used to do is really work hard to get onto a grid and think, right, I've worked really hard on sponsorship and getting the money, and few are just about made it. And you come up against a driver that had been out 5-6 times in that month, and they were just super sharp, and you're thinking, well, how am I going to compete on the long run with these guys? Because it'd be like a footballer, coming out of no match practice and coming up against someone who's been scoring week in, week out, or having practice every day. It's very hard to then stamp your authority or to sort of usurp them, because ultimately they're sharper. So yeah, it's very tricky, Formula One or general motor racing with finances. It's always been the case for many, many years. Things cost money. Sadly, in motorsport, they cost money, and someone somewhere along the line has to pay for them. So yeah, for me, growing up, it was all about sponsors and engaging with sponsors and partners, getting them having something back whilst they fund my career. But yeah, if you're the sort of driver that has a really rich, wealthy dad, then you're and you're quite good, and you've got talent and all the rest of it, then you're probably going to make it some form or another.
It's interesting though, because I've obviously know you very well, and you're almost a bit of a one-man band when it comes to your racing career. You ultimately, everything falls on your shoulders. You race, but you're the one in the off season that is having to find those sponsors, find that extra funding, locally and nationally as well. Do you feel as though did you feel that was a bit of a distraction for you in terms of your racing career? And do you think if you maybe had that, extra little bit of income, for example, you would have perhaps made that next step? Do you feel as though you maybe didn't quite reach that point because of the finances?
I think, it's so easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, if I had the opportunities that these boys do now, that I would have made it. And every driver is going to say the same thing. I think for me, where I probably would have liked to repeat would be when I was sort of 13, 14, 15. Nowadays, the hot thing to do is to just go out and test and practice and spend an awful lot of cash just getting good, basically practicing for the sport that you're going to enter. And at times, we didn't have that luxury. We just go straight into a race weekend or a season, and I just have to rely on a bit of talent or my hunger to try and win. And ultimately, that isn't always enough. And the window of working is so minute. I mean, in Formula 3, for example, you get a weekend, you'll get a 30-minute practice session on Friday evening, say 5 p.m. So you'll be at the circuit on Wednesday, and you'll do Thursday preparation, and then Friday night, you'll get a 30-minute practice session. and then Saturday morning qualifying, and then you get a race on the Sunday and the Saturday night. It's not a lot of time. I mean, Formula One, they do like 4 hours of practice. So, you know, everyone sort of thinks, oh, you're going to need loads of time to practice and really sharpen up your skills, but you really don't. And that's the hardest thing is you come up against drivers that are super sharp, have all the time in the world, you know, elsewhere to practice because they have all the money. But no, I don't regret anything that I've done. And I mean, as I say, I can easily say, yeah, I'd love to have done it differently. But at the end of the day, there are thousands and thousands of drivers that never made F1 and still won't make F1, sadly, even though some of them will be so much more talented than some of the drivers on the grid. I dread to think how many champions we've lost because they just couldn't have the funding to get there. But that is unfortunately part and parcel of the sport we love, and that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of being sharp and sharp reactions, was it during your time in Formula 2, the race in Spa that went viral because of your quick reactions to save yourself and a number of other drivers from actually a very nasty accident?
Yeah, good link that. I quite like the way you sort of link that one through. Yeah, that video was an interesting one because I put it up not expecting to get anything from it. I mean, it was a Spa 2012, really, really wet circuit. And I remember thinking, I can't really see anything. I was sort of driving along the straight. There were some yellow flags out, which meant slow down, there's an accident somewhere. And I remember just thinking, gosh, I mean, there's so much spray from the car ahead. I think I was about 7th or 8th. I was basically like, well, you know, this is quite dangerous. And the moment I sort of thought that, I just saw like a red flashing light on the car ahead. And you see it when if you get to sort of replay it a couple of times, you'll see the red light. And as soon as I see that, I kind of turn and react. And just avoided. There was like 5 cars. It would have been a huge pileup. More importantly, for me, I was doing about 130 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour. It wouldn't have been pretty to smack square on the car ahead impact, but got away with it. It was lucky, and now I think it's on a 1.5 million views or something like that on YouTube. And I did it just put it up as a bit of a kind of tokenistic joke, you know, and just look at this close reaction. And then it kind of went viral and took off, and then loads of magazines, and I think Top Gear picked it up, and it went round. Yeah. It's gone round and round. And I even had it where someone said, "Oh, have you seen this video?" And they had no idea.
Really?
Yeah, a couple of times. Well, there's a helmet on, you know, so they can't see my face. But it was an interesting time that I got away with. But I wouldn't advise trying to make a viral video that way. It was pretty dodgy.
And growing up, so with your racing, obviously your dad was a powerboat racer as well. So that kind of adrenaline fueled sport, the love for that sort of sport is in your blood, it's ingrained in you. What is it that you love just so much about a race weekend that maybe differs from that of a team sport? Like, I mean, obviously Formula One is a team sport in some regard, but actually it's down to the driver ultimately that's out on the grid. What differs for you from your normal team sport that just creates that kind of addiction to motor racing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question because I do like all sports. I love watching, you know, the football, tennis, golf. Golf is an individual sport, but I love team sports. You know that. But Formula One, like you say, and motor racing for me, just I don't know. It just has. I'm addicted to the feeling of competing on race day, and you see, the fans out watching all the cars get ready to go, and I think it's just the buzz, the element of, you know, you want to be the fastest guy. You want to leave that circuit the fastest and the best person. And you get a buzz from when you've won a race, people look at you and they think, wow, he was the boy, you know, he was the guy that won. And I like that feeling, you know, that I love when I competed at that level to be sort of up against some of the best drivers that, you know, they're super quick and you got the better of them. And I think that is where the hook is. And I mean, driving fast as well. I mean, that's obviously driving at high speed, on the limit. It's such a fine skill. You're doing 150 miles an hour, you know, braking, accelerating, everything kind of comes down to the fine lines. And we're looking for tenths of a second. You know, you think 1 second, 2 seconds. We're looking for 1/10 of that, sometimes even less, to try and beat the guy behind you or ahead of you. You know, it's mad when you think about the sort of intricacies of the sport. But I think it's that, you're challenging yourself at high level, and ultimately a game of football, game of tennis, whilst it's got its dangers, motor racing and driving at high speed comes with a little bit more danger, in the sense of, if you go into that wall, it's going to probably hurt at 150 miles an hour. So I think it's that really gets you. It's that kind of closeness to death and danger that ultimately brings me back again and again.
Have you had any nuggets of advice or any chance encounters with any big names in the industry that have maybe given you just that bit of encouragement? Or, for example, a time where you've really got to see that, the behind the scenes stuff is what people love to see. They don't necessarily know what goes on inside a garage or, after a race in the locker room or whatever. Have you had any moments or encounters with names that we will know and are popular among the general public and sports fans that have stuck with you?
I'm really sorry, Matt. I was focusing on nuggets as a word, so I don't even know what the question is. I was thinking of a pun, I'm vegetarian, and I was like, I'm sorry, I have no nuggets of information because I'm veggie. It's just not funny, is it?
Laugh that again.
Yeah.
This is what people love.
Nuggets. Go on. Don't use the word nuggets, though.
Okay, I won't. Snippets.
Okay, snippets is fine.
Okay. During your racing career, have you had any... I can't concentrate now. This is the problem, isn't it?
No.
So during your racing career, have you had any snippets of advice or moments when you've maybe had a chance encounter with a big name in the industry that has stuck with you, whether they've either given you encouragement or you've got to see their real personality behind the scenes?
I'm not sure I've got nuggets of information for you as such, but I think the person that I have met that stuck out in my mind would be Lewis Hamilton's dad. That was quite a fun encounter. He was a really, really nice guy. Had dinner with, I'm part of a club called the BRDC, British Racing Drivers Club. Quite an honour, actually, and you kind of have to be invited to the club to have done something in motorsport, and I think I've won just about enough races to get in. And we did this dinner, and he was next to me, and we got chatting, and really nice guy. And he just gave some really good advice back then. I think I was 20-ish, 21. So at that age, it was really, really cool to sort of sit alongside and hear stories about Lewis and growing up and how they kind of made it all the way to Formula One. Other than that, I don't know. I mean, I've raced against Sainz. I've raced against Kvyat. I think those are the only two current F1 drivers. In Formula 3, I was back in 2014, 13. Yeah, and that's about it. I think I've met drivers, Mark Webber's, I've met him as well, ex-F1 driver with Red Bull. I met guys that have done really, really cool stuff in the industry. But ultimately, it's quite weird because you don't want to sort of fanboy as such, because because you're all drivers, aren't you? And some have more opportunities, some have less. But you like to think that given the opportunity that you jump in the car and you could do as good a job, and if not better. And if you don't think you could do better than the guy that you're chatting to, then you probably shouldn't be a driver. So yeah, other than that, probably not.
And did you get the better of Carlos Sainz and Kvyat, or did they pip you that day?
I actually there's a video on YouTube there was a moment at Spa when I was coming through the grid in 2013, and I came up against Kvyat, and I overtook him, but then he got me back, and it was quite a nice little battle. But he ultimately had the last laugh. I couldn't get him again. But no, I mean, the answer is no. The answer is no. They were quite quick in Formula 3, especially. I think Kvyat actually won that year. But ultimately, you could tell that they were on the destined to F1. The Red Bull juniors, they were really, really quick. But yeah, I think that there are so many drivers that I've come up against, and I think, wow, that this guy's got something really good. And there's a mixture of nurture versus nature, as I said before. But no, nothing outstanding.
Right, we're going to look at three of the motor racing headlines that have kind of caught our attention this week. We were speaking about him a moment ago. The big news is that Carlos Sainz has moved to Ferrari. This was kind of Formula One's worst kept secret in some respects. Subsequently, that means that Sebastian Vettel will step away from Ferrari. Some are speculating that he may retire altogether from Formula One. But if you face the age of Kimi Raikkonen going, I think he's 41 this year, still racing, still competing. What do you make of that move, first of all, for Carlos Sainz? It seemed as though it was inevitable.
I mean, yeah, Carlos Sainz, what a dream move that is for him. And I've talked about timing on this before earlier. And I mean, the timing for Carlos Sainz, he's just come off the back of one of his best seasons. McLaren were pretty, on the way up. They were quite fast last year. I think he finished 6th in the standings. He was very consistent, had some really, really good races. And voila, Ferrari ping out Vettel, don't agree a contract. Suddenly, Ferrari have a seat available. And who's the next best driver in the standings? It's Sainz. And I mean, he deserves a seat, no doubt. But I mean, you look at last year, if it was last year, there isn't a seat available. Probably next year, there isn't a seat available. So it's mad how it all kind of works out in a way for him. But no, great year last year for him, for Carlos Sainz. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he will get on at Ferrari. I think it's going to be a different challenge for him because, McLaren was sort of the underdogs, if you like. He finished 6th overall, had some really good races, but the car wasn't ultimately as quick as the top 3 or 4 teams. So when he finished 5th, 6th, 4th, wherever he finished, I think he finished on the podium in Brazil, like you mentioned. That is a performance that he can sort of shout about and go, yes, I did that, and look how great that was in this car. When you're with Ferrari or Red Bull or Mercedes, you're expected to deliver that performance week in, week out. So with that comes a little bit of a different pressure. I think it'd be interesting to see how he gets on against Charles Leclerc, who's shown immediately last year winning races and was quick off the bat. Probably in some regards stopped Vettel's contract being renewed this year. It'd be interesting to see how he gets on against him, but also, as I say, how he performs week in, week out under pressure in one of the top cars in Formula One.
And that segues nicely in. Then we spoke about McLaren there, but Daniel Ricciardo has announced that he will be leaving Renault after, I say 2 years. We don't really know what this season is still going to look like as of yet. But it didn't turn out to be as fruitful as he perhaps hoped. There was obviously that awkward moment between Christian Horner and Cyril, the 2 team principals, going in, when that move was made. But he seems to have a strong bond with Lando Norris. So it'll be interesting to see how that partnership figures itself out.
Yeah, I think Daniel Ricciardo moved to Renault with he wanted a fresh impetus. He wanted to change. Renault have their own manufacture, so they have their own engines, their own control on, if you like, destiny from Red Bull, who were about to use Honda engines. I think obviously it hasn't worked out. I think year one he realised perhaps that although he was on a lucrative deal, drivers at that caliber, drivers when they get to a certain point, isn't about the money, isn't about the contract and the perks that come with that. I mean, I'm talking like I had a contract of 30 million. I didn't, but I'm assuming that when you get to that level, it's more about winning than the money. So, the contract he had with Renault, I'm sure was, as I said, the rumours were it was very lucrative, but he's ended it, or he's moved straight over to McLaren, like you say, for 2021. Be quite an interesting partnership, him with Lando Norris. Like you say, they've had they're both sort of jokey characters off the grid, but very fierce when it comes to putting the helmet on. So I'll be interested to see how they get on. I think they'll do quite well, especially if the McLaren car keeps moving up the grid, which it has been doing the last 2 or 3 years. Ricciardo is a winner in Formula One. He's a proven winner. So there's no real pressure for him to go and try and win a race, but he'll want to get back to winning ways. And I think with McLaren also moving to Mercedes engines, I think that could be quite an exciting prospect.
And as a driver in Lando Norris's position, when a driver like Daniel Ricciardo comes along, do you immediately think, oh God, I'm not the priority necessarily this year? For those that have maybe keep half an eye on Formula One, and obviously we have 2 drivers per team, does the lesser driver, if you like, suddenly panic and think my season's not going to look the same as it would have done had Carlos Sainz maybe stayed in that McLaren seat?
I mean, who knows? Maybe. But he seems to be quite fearless, Lando Norris. He doesn't seem to get spooked by big names or by big opportunities. And I think that comes from growing up, just with all, he's had amazing opportunities, super, super quick. And I think he'll do absolutely fine against Daniel Ricciardo. Who knows mentally where he's now at against Ricciardo? I think he'll be absolutely fine because, he's raced against Ricciardo. They were in the midfield battle last year anyway together, so he's probably got some good ideas about where he can, try and trump him in the same car. But I think he'd be quite excited about the opportunity to go against Daniel Ricciardo, to go against a new teammate, maybe learn a few things. Who knows? But yeah, I think that would be, as I say, an exciting prospect. Them two together, both really, really quick. Both one at the early stages, Lando at the early stages of his career, Daniel sort of in his prime, if you like. So I say I'm really excited to see how they get on, and hopefully the McLaren car will deliver sort of a top 5 car, if you like, that can compete at that level, and we'll see some cool races.
And 2 British Grand Prix look as though they're going to go ahead this year behind closed doors. It's going to be a really bizarre format. It also draws this, obviously, government guidelines now say if you are coming into the UK, you've got to quarantine for 2 weeks as well, which adds a different element to this altogether. How will that work, first of all, and ultimately, how much does a race day crowd have an impact on the drivers that are out on the circuit?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very tricky because I mentioned it earlier. The crowd is part of the game, if you like. It's part of the buzz. Yes, we don't, as a driver, you don't really notice the crowd. It's sort of part and part. It's sort of there, you know it's there, but you don't. You're in your sort of tunnel vision. But as a buzz, as a sport, that's going to be missed. They will be able to get on without it for sure. They'll be able to race, and when you're in your cockpit and you're racing, you're just going to go for that win, and it's on TV. So that's, even if it wasn't on TV, that's all doable. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to make it work with the whole quarantine process where we are right now in the UK, with the sort of social distancing rules. It's going to be very tricky. I mean, motorsport is quite a hands-on sport. Even small things like doing your belts up as a driver, that you're going to come in close contact with your mechanic. It's going to be very tricky, I believe, to get it going. But having said that, football's got going in Germany, and you can't social distance against the 11 other players. So I think we'll see. I think it's going to be exciting if we can get some form of racing going. Our sort of Porsche and sports car racing that I'm involved with have said that August onwards is our sort of expected time to sort of restart. So I think we'll see. I think it's going to be still up for jury whether we're going to get out fully. I'd like to see the racing going ahead. 2 British Grand Prix would be great for Silverstone, but yeah, we'll see how we get on. I think it's going to be interesting, but hopefully we can get some form of racing going just to keep us all sane.
I came to watch you up at Silverstone once in, I think it was the Porsche Carrera Cup, and you notice the crowds probably most of all when you actually arrive at the circuit, and then ultimately after the race as well. How important is it to have that buzz when you first arrived as a racing driver? You see the crowd, you don't necessarily hear them or even hear them shouting your name, for example, during the race itself, but ultimately when you first arrive and when you're leaving, when you're celebrating afterwards, so much is going to be taken away from those moments.
It is, because as drivers, we've done so many boring test days where you get to a race circuit and you just go round and round and round, and it feels like just another day at the office. And I think that's the thing with motorsport race days without crowd. It's just going to feel, for drivers, a lot of drivers, it's going to feel like just another boring day at the office. But then you add in the mix of racing, and that'll kind of keep everyone interested. The crowd is such a big part of the sport, of any sport, but motorsport as well, because as you said, you turn up, you got that routine, and there's for me as well, working with sponsors and partners, bringing guests and clients and engaging everyone into that is a huge part of it. It's not just getting the car. If it was a case of getting from your race truck to the car back again, yeah, it's not going to make a huge difference. But as I say, the motorsport weekends are a long time, Thursday to Sunday. So engaging with the crowd and fans and stuff like that is a big part of it. And ultimately, when you win, there's nothing cooler than winning in front of 20 or 30,000 people. So, or in Formula One's level, it's hundreds of thousands of people. So, it's a shame that we're going to probably see that. But at the end of the day, it's to save the sport, we're going to need to do something. And I think racing behind closed doors is going to be the only option this year, 2020. And we'll see what they bring out for all forms of sport next year.
And finally, we've seen a lot in the last few weeks, particularly given that we've been in lockdown. Esports virtual Grand Prix have been taking place, and a lot of the a lot of sports stars from around the world, plus F1 drivers, for example, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, and Alex Albon have been taking to the circuit themselves, and they've actually been, they can talk the talk and they can walk the walk as well, because they've been performing just as well as they have been in real time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was quite surprising. I don't personally get involved in the esports side. I just maybe a bit old for it. I don't know. I never really kind of got into it, and I think as drivers, I met a lot of drivers that are either into it fully and not. I mean, some have been forced into it due to this lockdown process and not being able to get on track. And so a lot of the guys have made the jump just because they're bored primarily. Drivers like Lewis Hamilton, we haven't seen. Vettel, I think, maybe did one or two stuff. But the sort of older generation, if you like, haven't really come across. But the young guys, like you said, Norris and Albon and Leclerc, they're all just, they're just dab hand. For them, it's like second nature because they grew up. They've grown up. They're still growing up with it. So for them, it isn't like a big shock. It's not like, oh, wow, I have to relearn how to do something. It's like just part and parcel of what they do. And, it's no surprise to see them winning races online as well as real life. But there does seem to be a small correlation between, some of the quicker guys in Formula One now in real life versus the esports stuff. They seem to sort of translate that quite well. So I'm sure it'd be quite interesting to see an experiment, how sort of realistic it is and what you can actually translate over. But so for me, it's not really something I'm sort of heavily into, but it's good fun to watch every now and then.
Not a replacement for the real thing, basically.
Yeah.
Moving on, 3 questions that I'm keen to get your thoughts on. So we're in 2020. Obviously, the season is going to be condensed now. We're looking at potentially 2 British Grand Prix as well. The racing calendar is going to look completely different to that of what it would do at the start of this year. Who would be your top 2 challengers for the championship out of the back of the current climate that we find ourselves in?
Well, I have to be honest, I didn't really follow the pre-season testing at Barcelona an awful lot. I feel like Mercedes have yet again got a quick car. That's my sort of feeling just from the small snippets that I've heard. So you'd have to say Lewis Hamilton would be the number one. I mean, that's the odds on are anyway, for even if Mercedes had a disastrous preseason. But Lewis Hamilton, I don't know about Ferrari. I mean, Ferrari had a really torrid end to the season, I think, if memory serves me right. So we'll see. I would say my top 2 would be Hamilton versus Leclerc at the moment. But that remains to be seen because, like you say, this season is going to be totally different. It's kind of like a restart. None of the cars have been fired up since February time or March time when the preseason was on. So it'd be interesting to see who comes out. The midfield battle, I'm sure, will be scrappy. And I think, teams like McLaren, Racing Point, Toro Rosso, those sort of midfield teams are going to be very close. And that'd be quite cool to see. But to answer your question, probably Hamilton. And I'd love to see Leclerc have a quick car again so he can compete.
And do you think Verstappen is maybe too volatile of a character, maybe still lacking that experience to challenge Hamilton?
No, I don't. I think he has. I think it took him a season, but he's now got all the qualities and all the temperaments correct in order to compete for the title. I think the one thing that's missing is ultimately the car. If the car can compete at the same level as Mercedes on a weekend by weekend basis, I think you'd see an awesome title battle between Verstappen and Hamilton. I just don't know yet whether Red Bull have the sort of consistency needed. We don't know. We're not sure. But Verstappen, in terms of a driver, for sure, has got everything he needs. He's got every skill in his pocket to go for it.
So we can't see past Hamilton for that one, but we'd like to see Charles Leclerc challenging. Who would be your biggest surprise for the 2020 season? Who do you think might shock a few people and pick up more points than perhaps everybody expected?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think 2020, so this year, I think probably Sainz is your safe bet, just because he finished highest up of the non-top 4 last year. So I think he'll do well again to sort of re-go with that sort of same impetus as he did last year. Now he's got a Ferrari contract in his pocket. He's got no pressure, so he can kind of go for it a little bit more and maybe take a few more risks when it comes to strategies and so on. So I think Sainz will probably do well. I think maybe at Lando as well. Lando Norris might be a good bet to sort of come up against Sainz, and he'll want to prove that he's of a similar quality and now experience to Sainz. So I'm sure that he'll want to show that actually the Ferrari contract might have well been put in his pocket as well as Sainz. But I think the other person that I'm excited to see would be Esteban Ocon at Renault. He'd be up against Daniel Ricciardo again, who's moving to McLaren. So Ocon himself will have no real pressure because he knows that other seat is now free, so his seat isn't under scrutiny. But he'll want to show Daniel a trick or two before he moves over to McLaren.
Absolutely. And I mentioned him earlier on, but Kimi Räikkönen, he's going to be 41 this year. As you get older as a racing driver, does he show any signs of slowing up? He's obviously got this very laid-back attitude where, in press conferences and stuff, he doesn't seem overly bothered to even be there. He sees it as a hobby as opposed to anything else. Could you see him making any sort of movements again this, in the tail end of this season, or will he just be there just for the fun of it?
I don't think he's. I think if you asked him, he wouldn't say he's just there for the fun of it. He's with Sauber. I think they're called Sauber or Alpha Tauri. I can't remember what they changed the name to. But I think he's at 41. He's probably peaked at his best in terms of the quality, but he's still rapid. He's still really, really fast. He's up against Giovinazzi, who's a young whippersnapper who was super quick. I think he finished second in Formula 2 a few years back, up against Gasly. I think that's correct in saying so. He's no slouch, Giovinazzi, and ultimately Raikkonen had a strong season against him last year. The car is never going to probably be up there in terms of the top 4 fighting, top 5 even. They just haven't got the budget to compete. So Raikkonen, I think you'll maybe see one more good season out of him. But he obviously still enjoys the buzz. He still enjoys racing, and he still enjoys competing. And so he's not there for fun. He's there to really do well. And you just sort of shift your mentality. When he was at Ferrari, doing well was winning races. When he's now with Sauber, doing well will be probably top 6, top 7 in the points. So it doesn't matter where you are as a driver. You set yourself challenges. Your team will set you challenges, your engineers and mechanics. And if you can go and set that, complete that challenge, then you've had a good day. And I think that's probably short of, as well as adding the sort of 25 million or whatever he's earning, I'm sure he's having a good time.
And who do you think finally will come off worse after this break, this shortened season? Sebastian Vettel, maybe now he's had his nose put slightly out of joint, given that he's leaving Ferrari. Who do you think maybe will come off worse?
Yeah, Vettel will be an interesting one, how he bounces back. He's never one to slouch or give up over his career. You've never seen him kind of be off the boil. But he knows he's not going to be with Ferrari next year. He hasn't immediately got a seat signed up for next year. I'd love to see him go to Mercedes and partner up with Hamilton. That'd be my dream move for him. But we don't know where he's going. He might well retire in 2021, for 2021. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of reacts to his, non-renewal of his contract. I think he'll go at it gung ho and just go for moves that he might well have not done, and I think he'll have a bit of fun, especially if he is going to retire next year. I think he'll just go and have a laugh and go for great results. Who will come off worse? It's an interesting one. I'm not really sure driver-wise. I think it's going to be chaos in the midfield battle. I think you're going to see a lot of rustiness, a lot of drivers that will go for moves that weren't on, because we'll have probably 5-6 months out by the time that they get back to it. And since they last raced, which would be November last year, it's going to be even longer. So I'll be interested to see how the midfield battle, even the top two battle goes on. Albon, Gasly, those sort of names, maybe a little bit rusty, but ultimately they're all quality drivers. So you're not going to see anything crazy, I don't think.
Well, it could make for a very exciting shortened season. Dino, aside from the business side of things, from a racing perspective, do you have long-term goals, championships that you'd like to compete in moving forward, and goals that you want to meet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm my sort of goal next. I've sort of taken this year as like reevaluating the goals, and I've got a lot more time to do that now. But I think Le Mans 24 hour. I've raced at the Le Mans circuit in 2017. Finished second there. That was a Porsche Carrera Cup support race on the actual Le Mans circuit. So I think my next goal will be to race at the 24 hours of Le Mans. You're up with two other teammates. I think that would be entirely epic to do, and I think it would be like a nice, no matter what, a nice tick off the sort of career highlights. So I think that's going to be probably the next step for me to look forwards to.
Can I come with you and hold your water bottle or something when you're there?
No.
Okay, fine. Whatever. Well, it's been a pleasure. Aside from that, Dino, hopefully we can make this a more regular thing and talk things all Formula One. But it's been very interesting to have all of your insight and your expert knowledge.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Another episode of the Clubhouse ticked off. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and we'll be back very soon with more episodes.